Thank you, President Howard. Our speaker today is one that has traveled many different trails, and I'm sure happy she's found one of the trails that ended up here at the United Fellowship Chapel. Reverend Genie Joseph.
Thank you. Yeah, it's a good thing I have a lot of pairs of shoes. A lot of trims. So what I'd like to talk to you about today is becoming the light of the world. Does that sound like too big a topic? So maybe becoming a light in your world. So whether that's with your animals, with your people, wherever you find yourself, if you're in Sprouts, if you go to the loft, maybe you can be just a light in that moment. And maybe some people can feel it, maybe some people can't, but wow, if we just take that as our process, that moving meditation of as we move about in the world, that we see ourselves as a source of light. And those who are ready to have a little taste of it will be healed and uplifted, and those who are not will just not notice. So it's a very peaceful way of being in the world and of making that offering in everything that we do and with every breath that we take. It's interesting, I was thinking about breathing, because breathing was one of the first things that Reverend David talked to me about. One of his first messages to me when I first came to the chapel was he invited me to become more aware of my breathing. And every once in a while I remember him saying that to me, and helps me to get more present, to be more in my body. It was I took a seminar this weekend. I was at UA, and we had a filmmaking seminar, and they showed us a documentary called Breathing Lessons, which won an Oscar. And I don't know if any of you have seen that. You've seen it? Mm-hmm. It's very intense. It's about a man, when he was 6 years old, he got polio, and he spent the whole rest of his life, I think he's in his 40s now, in an iron lung. And he can, the iron lung breathes for him. He can only come out of that lung once or twice a week for an hour or so. So his whole life is in this iron lung. And, the film really gets to you. It's on Netflix if you want to watch it. It's not an easy watch, but in some ways it's so inspiring, because what he comes to is he asks the question at the end of this film. He says, am I a body? In which case this is a pretty miserable life. Or am I a soul? In which case this is pretty beautiful, because he gets to spend all of his time in his inner experience. So it's a very inspiring film in its own way, but I'll warn you, it's not an easy watch. But it really has stayed with me, and it's really made me grateful for the fact that I can breathe on my own and make my own breakfast and do my own thing and be my own person. And one of the ways that we have choice and freedom is to choose to be in our light. It's such a beautiful thing that we have. We have so much freedom, and especially thinking about that on Veterans Day, to think about all the ways that we are free and all the ways that we can choose to express ourselves and to be in our light. So that's really what I wanted to talk to you about. And it's funny to think about, seems like there's so much darkness around in the world today. It certainly looks that way. And what does it mean to be a light worker in the context of all this darkness? And so, any way you choose to take action is a good way, but one way is to think about shining your light even brighter. Because that's one way to respond to darkness, is to emblazon your light, to bring your light up even stronger. And every once in a while to not think about just your light as your light, but the light, and as a gift that we can give to everyone. And that's a wonderful way to respond to darkness. And isn't darkness such a beautiful invitation? Because when we become aware of darkness, it's also an opportunity to choose more light. And so in that way, the darkness that we see around us doesn't have to be called negative or dark. It's just an aspect of experience where we have an invitation to experience more light. How's that sound? Good? Yes. Because every time we choose light, we, in a sense, enlighten the world. We bring light into the world. And I wanted to tell you a story from, it's not my story, it's a story from Eckhart Tolle, and it's a book called The Power of Now. Maybe some of you have read that or seen it. I had it on my shelf for 20 years, and I just recently read it because it's part of a course that I'm taking, and it was required reading. I was very grumpy about it, but I'm so glad I read it. And one of the stories I wanted to share with you is from that book. And he tells a story about a Zen monk. And this Zen monk was very dedicated. He studied. You remember the story? Mm-hmm. Yeah, he studied and he studied, and he meditated for hours a day, and he really searched, and he did everything right. And he was working so hard, looking for enlightenment. It kept eluding him. And one day he was out in the world, in the marketplace, and he overheard a friend talking to the butcher. And he said to the butcher, I hope you don't mind the vegetarians in the room when we talk about meat. He said, give me your best piece of meat, he said to the butcher. And the butcher said to him, all of my pieces are the best piece of meat. And in that moment, the Zen monk experienced enlightenment. So what do you think it was about that moment? Just hearing those words, what was it about that gave him the experience of enlightenment? It's a question you can answer. Anyone like to venture guess? What was it about hearing that? All of my pieces are the perfect piece.
Being in the now.
Being in the now, yeah. It's the absence of judgment. Instead of saying, this is a good piece and that's a bad piece, what if they're all good pieces? What if it's all perfect? So what if the light and the dark is perfect? And so that was a moment for him where he let go of seeing the duality of all and seeing the perfection in everything. And so that tiny moment of being out in the world and overhearing, opening his heart, being willing to listen, to receive, that was his moment of enlightenment. So any moment could be that for you. Any moment that you choose to say, I'm not going to see this as good and that as bad, but see it all as part of this process. And that can happen in any moment, in every moment, any time you choose. And that's pretty exciting that the world offers us all of these opportunities to see the oneness of it all. And that brings us into the presence. So let's talk a little bit about presence. Presence to me is this feeling of awareness of the divine that's here. So I am here, the divine is here. Those are not two separate things. The divine is here within me as it is within you, all of us. So that awareness is presence. And I think, it'd be wonderful to write a book if anyone wants to. The power of presence. Because presence is so powerful in terms of changing our experience. Because when we're aware of the divine, I am the divine is me, the divine is you, all of that all at once gives us a tremendous power. And so some of you know that I'm in a training program for working with animals, and this is one of the cornerstones of the teaching of that method. So one of the parts of the ways that we work with animals is to bring divine presence into the presence of animals. And of course, they are already, I believe, experiencing that, but we are accelerating that. We are bringing that, when two or more are gathered, it increases the power. So when we come together aware of their presence, they become aware of our presence, something magical happens. So it's not that I heal them or we heal them, but the healing occurs when more presence is invited in. So that's a cornerstone of the way that we work with animals. So some of you have heard the story. I apologize, I'll tell a story again, but I want to tell a story about a little miniature horse. He's white, he has blue eyes. His name is Charlie. I call him Charlie Horse. And he's a real sweetie pie. But he has had a really rough time in this lifetime. Wherever he is in the herd, he gets picked on. So he was in a field, and the horses were so mean to him that they wouldn't let him eat, and they wouldn't let him drink, and they wouldn't let him have the shade. I mean, they literally tried to kill him. And so fortunately, he was adopted by a woman who's not a metaphysician, doesn't have this great understanding, but she has a beautiful heart, and she adopted this horse and brought him into a new herd. And guess what happened in the new herd? They won't let him eat. They won't let him drink. Not quite as rough, but the same dynamic. So brand new herd. But Charlie, whatever that dynamic is within Charlie, is still being expressed in a brand new herd. And so this was a real conundrum for me, because it really hurt my heart to see this, this incredibly sweet horse. And I happened to have an opportunity to work with this horse with if you've heard of this technology called heart math, where you can test your heart rate variability. And so I was hooked up and Charlie was hooked up, and we achieved complete synchronicity within 3 decimal points of perfect heart unison. So this is a very evolved horse. It was a very beautiful experience that we had of getting our heartbeats into perfect synchronicity. And yet this horse is being treated pretty poorly in this herd. So I've had so far one opportunity to do this healing work with him, and it was very beautiful. And afterwards, basically what I was doing was bringing in presence. I mean, just doing a few other things that were part of this technique. But after that, he was able, the herd was willing to allow him to eat within a few feet, within about 4 or 5 feet. He could eat for the first time in the herd. So that was very, very beautiful for me to see that transformation, because I didn't do anything. I didn't, give him any medicine or give him any chiropractic adjustments. It was simply the presence, and the presence changes the herd. So even though my focus was on Charlie and working with this, and it was about a half an hour that I had to work with him, but it changed something in the herd. And it's invisible. I mean, I can't explain it. I didn't do it. All I did was, assist in bringing presence into the herd, and somehow that changes everything. So my invitation to you is to think about where in your life could you bring more presence, and how could that change the herd meaning those who are around you, whether that be family members or pets or in Sprouts or at the post office or with the traffic. How could you drive with that understanding? In Hawaii, we call that driving with aloha, right? So we'll call that driving with presence here. It can change things. And once when you do that and you see the change, it really inspires you, it really brings you faith that this stuff actually works. It's not just something David made up or we talk about here. This stuff really works. It's really beautiful to see. So I just want to finish with one little reading from Eckhart Tolle, and this is from that same book, The Power of Now. And he says, I quote, "Your healing influence is primarily based not on doing, but on being. Everybody you come in contact with will be touched by your presence and affected by the peace that you emanate, whether they are conscious of it or not." So that's a kind of exciting idea. They don't have to be conscious. They don't have to be on the same page with you. They'll either receive it if they're ready or not. But it's an offering. And he goes on, "When you are fully present and people around you manifest unconscious behavior, you won't feel the need to react to it so that you don't give it any reality." So that's an interesting idea. People are being unconscious and we can go to war with it, or we can simply not react. And that is what decreases the force of it if we don't engage it. It's an interesting idea, right? So he says, "Your peace is so vast and so deep that anything that is not peace disappears into it as if it had never existed." So what a concept, the idea of peace as this vortex, and that we can simply be the keepers of the peace like a lighthouse. And that which is non-peace, like with the horses, just disappeared. I don't know what behavior it was that Charlie did that causes him to be treated this way. I don't know what the horses, these aren't bad horses that are mistreating him, but there's something that's happening in that energy field that's a mystery. I may or may not ever understand it, but I know that peace can transform it. The gentleness, the coherence of peace changes the behavior of a herd. Okay, so what this does is this breaks the karmic cycle of action and reaction. You're non-reacting to the negativity, breaks the cycle. And that's so different from how we've been used to seeing how we need to deal with negativity, that we need to fight it or resist it. The idea that you cannot react to it, that you can simply introduce peace as a transformative power. That's pretty exciting. He goes on, animals, trees, flowers will feel your peace and respond to it. You teach through being, through demonstrating the peace of God. You become the light of the world. You're an emanation of pure consciousness, and this is how you eliminate suffering on the level of cause. You eliminate unconsciousness from the world. So that's what Eckhart Tolle had to say. Because when you eliminate unconsciousness, you add to the light of the world. Thank you.